You'll notice, well, I forgot my notes, right? So no, I don't need them, right? Dorothy Baumann-Polly has, I think in many ways, been a force in this industry that only time will tell how important that is. But she's the founding director, not only the director, the founding director of the Geneva Center for Business and Human Rights at the University of Geneva. But she's also the research director at the NYU, the New York University Stern Center for Business and Human Rights. And I met Doro, so she's also a professor at the University of Geneva. You could read the bio, but to give you a little bit of an idea about the kind of person Doro is, I first met her at the UN building for the first time. This was when I was working with AACSB a pretty long time ago. And we met along with a lot of other people. And I think we were going to meet up somewhere afterwards. Well, Doro's on board for this, but she walks out, instead of getting into a taxi or an Uber like everyone else, she hops on her bike and drives in New York City. And I always thought that was an impossible thing to do, but that's the kind of person. So Doro also, one of the things that strikes me is that any place in the world where there's a need for professors to be, she'll go there. She's done research in the Congo on cobalt. And the kinds of things we need to do as scholars, I think she has particularly useful insights about. But I'm going to turn it over to Doro. She's been great within our industry. She's a force that I think you'll recognize years from now has been very powerful. Come on up, Doro.
Yeah.
I'm just going to go up.
Thank you. No. Dan, thank you. You made me laugh. Thanks for your very kind introduction. It's such a pleasure to be back. Last time was Portugal, Lisbon, for me to meet for the first time the GBSN community, and it's a wonderful community. I'm very happy to be here to see so many like-minded people in academia. So I'm in a tough spot now because this is the session after lunch, and it's a tough spot also because I'm going to talk about something that many of you have probably never heard of before. In academic language, the empirical phenomenon that I want to cover today is multi-stakeholder initiatives. This morning we heard a lot about the key role that sustainability should play in business school education. And we also heard that we as academics are so good at diagnosing problems and often not very good at defining solutions. This session on multi-stakeholder initiatives is dedicated to avenues through which I hope we can define solutions. It requires so many stakeholder perspectives and collaborations to fully understand a problem and to hopefully also support the development of solutions. And I think we need to train future business leaders to be solutions oriented. We're always good at diagnosing problems, but we really should capacitate the next generation of managers to work on these solutions. So this is what this session is about. And I have with me two fantastic people. First, Charles Autemin, who is from the HEC Paris. He got his master there, and now he returned as an instructor for business human rights. And he's been a core consultant for the ILO for over a decade. He will actually help me to run the session and prompt me whenever I forget to say something. And then I'm also very happy to have Scheide Toledo. He's the director, founder of HB Antwerp. It's a diamond company. And I want to know from him, what role does collaboration play for you in real terms? Please come up on stage. Thank you very much. So multi-stakeholder initiatives, and I don't want to lecture you, but there are in practice everywhere in corporate practice. No matter which industry you work on, you'll find a so-called multi-stakeholder initiative. There's, of course, as always, no commonly agreed definition, but what is a multi-stakeholder initiative? In broad terms, it's a framework that brings together representatives from business, civil society, sometimes governments, sometimes academia, to work together on issues of common concern, often in the realm of sustainability. Just to give a few examples, I've actually worked myself in the Fair Labor Association. It's a multi-stakeholder initiative with the mission to advance labor rights in global supply chains. Here in Amsterdam, we have the Fair Wear Foundation in the same industry. There's ICTY, the International Council for Toys for Sustainable Toy Production. There's a roundtable for sustainable palm oil. In many commodities, you will find a multi-stakeholder initiative. So isn't it interesting that what is so common in practice is not at all discussed in the classroom? At least I don't know of many courses where this would be an integral standard component as a potential solution to the sustainability challenges that need to become part of our business school education. That the multi-stakeholder initiatives emerged because the challenges we face are too big for any one actor to take on alone. So we need this collaboration. And now I'll draw Charles' statistical knowledge from the ILO. They actually keep track of some of these problems. And so, Charles, I want to talk about sort of the magnitude of issues we are facing, and clearly companies have a role to play to address them.
Sure, thank you for the question, and thanks to the organizers for the invitation. 20 years back, some of the core human rights abuses in the workplace, labor rights violation, we didn't necessarily know very well what the magnitude of the problem was. If you remember back at the end of the 1990s, we started to have some big scandals appear, thanks to the media notably. And this is when we first started to collectively, especially through the International Labor Organization, try to measure some indicators of abuse. One important one is child labor. And when the ILO published the first global estimate on child labor in the beginning of the year 2000, we realized that 16% of children between 5 and 18 years of age were working. Working in conditions of, as defined by the child labor conventions. So not just helping out, but either children that were below the minimum age convention, so working below 14, or they were working in hazardous work, in work that they should not be doing, in mining, in tobacco fields, in the sex industry as well. And so that was a very striking figure. And we made some progress since, because when these estimates were carried out every 4 years or so, and we made some progress roughly up around 2012. And this is why, actually, when you look at the SDGs, I've seen several of you who have the SDG pin, SDG 8, which is around decent work, target 7, when it was fixed, the 2030 agenda, for child labor, they didn't say our target is 2030. They said our target is 2025. So back when the decent work agenda was established and the 2030 agenda was established, we thought we could eliminate child labor by 2025. And we're nowhere close to that, unfortunately. And just last year, I don't know how many of you know that 2021 was called the year for the acceleration of the elimination of child labor. In my country, France, barely anyone knows, which is surprising because France is chairing the Global Alliance Against Child Labor, which no one knows as well. The chair does know that she's chairing this alliance, but apart from her, not a lot of people know, and at least none of my students know. This is when the figures were published that we were seeing an increase in child labor. And there was actually an asterisk when the ILO published the findings on the 12th of June for International Child Labor Day, where they said, we think there is 160 million. Those are the estimates for last year. When you release an estimate, it's been calculated in the previous times. But because of COVID, we anticipate that we may be at 169 and anywhere between 200 and 140 million in the future. And actually that bracket depends, I think, a lot on business schools and on business decisions that are taken to address child labor in the supply chains. So we're not doing good at all. And for all the talk we have on the sustainable planet, let's not forget that in some countries, in Africa, we have 1 in 5 children currently in child labor. 1 in 5 children. So you take 20% of the room and you take it out and you put it in the field. That's basically what we have. So it's a very, very big issue. And let's hope MSI's multi-stakeholder initiatives can help us tackle that.
Right. Thank you, Charles, for giving us a sense of the magnitude and severity of the issues that businesses are now facing that are operating globally. And I believe, there's consensus now that companies cannot just outsource production and responsibility for working conditions, but they need to figure out ways how to address those issues of common concern, like ILO core labor standards in their production sites through the way how they source from these sites. And now that I'm making the case for multi-stakeholder collaborations, this is something that I bring into my teaching to make my students understand that unless you bring in those multiple stakeholder perspectives, you may not even be able to identify the problem in a correct way. If you don't identify the problem the correct way, you're also not able to define solutions. And what Charles just alluded to is that we haven't made impressive progress on a lot of those issues that we acknowledge as problems. In my field, business human rights, clearly companies are now beyond the point of arguing whether or not they have a role to play for addressing these issues. They acknowledge they have a role to play, but it's the how to do it where they're still struggling. And the how, I believe, these are skills that are ideally trained at business schools. It's those management skills that I think can help you on the how question. So this is not very original, I was told, but this is a little cartoon I show to my students called 6 Blind Men and an Elephant. And as you can see, as those blind men individually, none of them can figure out that they're touching an elephant. Instead, they only see a small part of it and come to the wrong conclusion. And there's an analogy to many issues I've seen in practice, including addressing child labor concerns where the children were thrown off fields where they've worked, and then some actors declared victory over child labor. But if you looked closely, the undermining factor for child labor was poverty, and those children maybe didn't work on the fields anymore, but then they worked elsewhere. So it was just a relocation of the actual problem because the root causes for child labor weren't well understood. So I'm trying to make the case here again to bring in multiple perspectives. But, it's one thing for an academic to make the case for multi-stakeholder collaboration. I'm very happy to have an actual practitioner with us who can talk about the value that collaboration brings him and his company. So I have 2 questions for you, Shai. First of all, does this correspond what we've just sort of outlined at all with your business reality? You're in the diamond business. During the break, in a short conversation, someone said, well, all I know about, diamonds is the movie Blood Diamonds and the human rights issues that come with sourcing diamonds from African countries. I'd like to hear from you. How do you see the value of collaboration in your context? And then as a distinct question from that, how do you see the value of multi-stakeholder initiatives in your sector? There are many in diamonds. So Shai, over to you.
Thank you. And thank you for having me. Everything you know about diamond industry or don't know is true. And that is, it is the most opaque, ridiculous supply chain ever created, filled with the most ridiculous of players that have, and the proof is sort of in the pudding. And the proof can be divided into 2. One is the movie that you mentioned. And the fact that the industry could not have countered it is obviously a testament to an industry that have no mother and no father. And the other one, which is, I guess, what I represent here, which is the money, is that you go and you buy a diamond today and you try to sell it in a year from now, and the value is 60 cents on the dollar or 50 cents on the dollar. And it doesn't matter where you buy it, whether you bought it in Walmart or in Tiffany or in Zales, or it doesn't matter, because they all come with a certificate called GIA, which is an American institution that basically commoditize all stones, and therefore it doesn't matter if they come from Russia, Zimbabwe, Sierra Leone, or Botswana. They're all treated the same. So I guess the result of our industry is in the pudding, and the pudding is that it does not retain its value. So when we came on to build HB Antwerp, we did not come to build another company, but rather an alternative universe. And in that universe, everything is different. In that universe, all the protocols and all the standards and all the stakeholders and all the beneficiaries are different than the one which are current. So what we do is we transform the diamonds for the people that owns them, and the people that owns them are the countries and the communities in which they are mined. And once you create that link between the place that they were mined and between the consumer, and you get rid of everyone in between, that very much like that elephant that you showed, we use a very similar one of almost like a hot potato that we have about 20 players, and each one of them is just eager to move the hot potato for the next. And as a result of that, there is no one takes ownership. And when no one takes ownership, no one is accountable. And when no one is accountable, then you can do whatever the hell you want, including employ who you want and in whichever condition that you want, because at the end of the day, it's being aggregated with a GIA certificate, and the consumer is totally unaware whether these stones were made in Antwerp or in India or in Bangladesh or in China. So when there is no accountability, there is no product differentiation, and then you can do whatever you want. And in many ways, this industry has, over the years, have created this wall that they call it secrecy or mystery or romance, but in fact, it's simply to hide everything that they don't want you to see. So the idea of putting everything out there is the idea of the company that we've built. And
radical transparency.
and going to your question is to say, okay, so how do you do it? How do you bring along and that the end result is not trust me, or the end result is not no, but you have to believe that what I'm saying to you is true. And that is when you engage with serious players to create, as you mentioned, a radical change in the way that you present the supply chain of the stone, or in the way that you present the journey of the stone. And then you do two things. One is you envision how that ledger, how that visual of a journey looks like, and how many thousands of points of verification it requires. Right. And then you say, okay, but if I will do it myself, I have to be humble enough to know what I can and what I can't do. And what we can do is we can transform the stones and we can build infrastructures, but maybe we're not the best in how to demonstrate it, or how to validate it, or how to create an immutable sets of information. So we brought stakeholders along, and one of them is Microsoft. And I think the biggest hurdle in convincing companies like Microsoft, which we could not have done without, is to say, come in and create a change in the diamond industry. And that diamond industry, in regards to Botswana, which is where we started, accounts for roughly half of their GDP. So when we speak about positive contribution to this beautiful democracy that is the shining light in terms of policy and governance when it comes to diamonds, we're going to start there. We're going to start from the country that made it. And if we can show that there we can improve it, then for sure we can do the same for the rest. And obviously, the stakeholders or the multi-stakeholders, they all had the same fear of, just a second, this is a dirty industry and we want nothing a part of it. And I guess our biggest win was that we were able to convince them that there is another way, that there is a parallel universe, and that they can actually affect change in millions of people's life if they come on board. So I guess this is our biggest achievement, to bring such players as Microsoft and as another 7 engineering companies. We bought the only R&D facilities in the diamond industry. We are converting it from robotics all the way to the quality of our SQL. So we're employing tens and tens of engineers across, and we've done it over the last 2.5 years. So 2.5 years we were not existing. Mm-hmm. So I guess we also show that you don't really need to be ancient, and you don't need to have a history of 50 years. And you just need to have a great idea and bring people around it.
For that great idea, collaboration is central.
Absolutely.
And you start in Botswana, but let me follow up with a question about those multi-stakeholder initiatives in the diamond industry. And to mention one, there's the Responsible Jewelry Council, which has become, well, a contested organization as the war in Ukraine broke out, because they have big business in with Russia. So I'd love to hear from you how in your sector, collaboration is of great value, you say, but then these higher level industry initiatives, how do you see these? Are they adding value for what you plan to do?
Yeah, I can honestly not point one that is worth the paper in which it's typed on, simply because the institution that have created it are the same players. The one that represents America is the #1 lab-grown. The one that represents the RJC are the mining players, mainly Russia and De Beers. And so each of these institutions were created to give titles to themselves, and they have a fantastic yearly agenda in which they give each other vice president and presidents and other beautiful titles. But in fact, these are just companies that they decided to create a union to serve themselves. So in none of them would we have this agency or the other is about the community, or it's about royalty distribution, or it's about this or the other. It's simply to preserve their status quo. So that's why we had to do it ourselves, and we had to bring players outside of the industry, because those inside are simply not people that we can play with.
I think that's an incredibly valuable contribution, because we also need to understand that many of these multi-stakeholder initiatives, unfortunately, do not serve the purpose for which they were created for. So there are many different types of organizations that call themselves multi-stakeholder initiatives to address grand societal challenges, yet they don't deliver because they're set up in a way that perpetuate many of the issues. I've actually created a slide with sort of the dark side and the bright side of MSIs, and you've already spoken to the dark side, but I know Charles has more to say about that too, and then I will end on a more positive note.
Yeah, let's do it this way. You're right. I mean, some of you are already depressed after this morning, so I'll handle the dark sides. No, it's true. I mean, one of the things you were referring to, it's different from industry to industry. I wouldn't throw all multi-stakeholder initiatives as worthless. Actually, the philosophy behind multi-stakeholder initiatives is fundamental to the challenges that we have. No one actor, be it government, be it civil society organization, be it business school, will be able to tackle 169 million children in child labor over the whole planet, working in so many different supply chains and industries. And so it's not possible the very same way that the call for collaboration we had this morning and versus competition is really important. So I put it different realities. It's true that under one name, we have different realities. And I think aside from all of your responsibilities, you're all consumers and you're all lost sometimes in translation in the supermarket with products that exhibit things, labels, certification. It's not necessarily diamond, it might be tuna, but you don't really know what that's worth. And the idea is not to say everyone here is trying to cheat the audience, but MSIs under the label multi-stakeholder initiatives, we have a lot of different realities. Hence the call of Doro to say, if we don't teach multi-stakeholder initiatives to our students, they won't be able to understand the complexity of what that actually means. There's obviously the idea that people do that for public relations. I mean, we saw this morning the very interesting talk, which was done in a way on behalf of a lot of companies. And, you know, I suspect many of these companies are happy that, you know, to participate in multi-stakeholder initiatives where a discourse will be taken. At the individual level, their individual role might not be always completely aligned with that. So there's always this dark side of whether communication, is it just PR or not? The standards, I think I saw a question related to the session about, are the standards the same all around the planet? I work a lot with the International Labour Organization. I'd like to remind you, it was created in the Versailles Treaty after First World War as an answer to World War I, social justice through work. And this ILO, which is our institution, produces global standards. So no, there is no different standard in Botswana and Amsterdam. It's the same standard everywhere. Doesn't apply either here or there in many cases, but that's another problem. And then the risk we see of safe havens is that there's an increase in regulation right now. Some of you, especially living in Europe, might be familiar with what we would call mandatory human rights due diligence. And there's the idea that maybe being a member of a club protects you from some regulations. It would be a way of protecting you. And so there's criticism or risks related to multi-stakeholder initiatives. If you just have to be a member of the club to be immune from prosecution, from responsibility in labor abuses, that can become a problem. But it's these dark sides are severely outweighed by the, I wouldn't say the positive aspects, but the potential of MSI. So Doro, if you want to.
Yeah, thanks for passing the ball on to me. Indeed, right now in my field, business human rights, we have so-called emerging mandatory human rights due diligence, and most civil society representatives dismiss multi-stakeholder initiatives as smokescreens that didn't deliver. And it has partly to do with what Charles said, that, well, multi-stakeholder initiatives, it's a big bucket with a lot of different types of organizations in there. Instead of throwing out the baby with the bathwater, let's look at these multi-stakeholder initiatives closely, because they exist, they're around, and corporations keep signing up for them. So there must be some value beyond just the public relation facade that some of these offer. So what we're doing at NYU Stern at the Geneva Center was to introduce what I would call greater rigor and nuance to this debate about multi-stakeholder initiatives so that they reach their full potential for advancing sustainability and human rights in corporate practice. So we've developed criteria for multi-stakeholder initiatives that deserve their name. And clearly the #1 criteria should be that they're actually MSIs. So are truly all relevant stakeholder perspectives represented in the governance structure of MSIs? There are many organizations that call themselves MSIs, but they relegate, for example, the perspectives of civil society organizations to an advisory body that's not part of decision-making, has no voting rights. So that to us doesn't then qualify to be a true multi-stakeholder initiative. If you come together to jointly tackle a problem, you should also give everyone the same right to have a say over how to move forward. And as Charles pointed out, it's also for us undisputable that an MSI needs to correspond to international laws, international standards, in the way those multi-stakeholder initiatives allow to translate international standards to industry-specific contexts. I mentioned I worked for the Fair Labor Association, and their workplace code of conduct translates international core labor standards into something that is measurable in the garment supply chain, for example. Their code is translated into metrics and a monitoring tool to measure compliance with the code. So versus a broad commitment to we respect human rights, they're actually in very concrete and sometimes technical terms spell out what that means. And certainly this is a vision of myself and other colleagues, that we make human rights performance of companies measurable. Just like greenhouse gas emissions, eventually we want to know which company is the best performer for human rights. If I care about human rights, which company should I reward as a consumer or as an investor? And this only works if we have common standards that are translated into metrics and means of evaluation. So multi-stakeholder initiatives have the potential to do that translation and arrive at something that's measurable and adequate for the industry concerned. And other criteria, of course, include that we need to be able to monitor compliance. If there are no sticks, it's a meaningless initiative. There must be some enforcement means and penalties, and public transparency to create the trust and credibility that many corporations are seeking, which they cannot generate on their own. The company talks about themselves only. I mean, they can say a lot of things. It's not as credible as when a third party attests to a specific standard because it was measured according to a specific standard. So with this, because I want to make this very applied to you, I also want to share with you how am I teaching this in my classes, and Charles will do the same. So I want to capacitate students to see the value of collaboration. So I have an exercise that deals with a scenario: a storm is coming, a corporate event was planned. If you talk to the weather experts or the event organizing company or the corporation or maybe some citizens, whoever you talk to will have a different perspective on should we cancel or should we not cancel. If you give students this dilemma to deal with and say you have 10 minutes, so there's time pressure, they realize they will all arrive at a different conclusion unless they come together and actually exchange their points of view and then jointly make a more informed decision than, being in their siloed selves. I also bring that into my teaching that relates to my research. Here I have a picture that I took in the Democratic Republic of the Congo at a mine site for cobalt. I asked my students, so if we want to address the human rights issues in cobalt sourcing, in this case, this is mine safety and child labor, who should be at the table to solve this problem with us? So do we do a stakeholder mapping exercise, and then we do a fictitious, unfortunately fictitious stakeholder meeting to discuss what are the options, who should be part of this, who could finance these solutions. And it shows to students, this is probably something I need to do if I'm in a future corporate role, because I will have to deal with these problems that are systemic in some of the production countries. How do you teach this? So I have some role plays, some scenarios, and ideally I bring in a corporate practitioner who actually talks about the very real applied way of collaborative working in the corporate context.
Well, first of all, I mean, I was not trained as a teacher. I asked permission to my former school to have the chance to exchange with the students because I just wanted to see what their perspectives were. I was quite surprised when I came back at HEC after over 10 years to see that I was expecting a little bit of a Greta generation on these issues. To be quite honest, it was not the case. I teach an elective course, so the students I have in front of me are more or less interested in what I have to say, at least at the beginning. but they're really unaware of all of these challenges. I'm really quite impressed by how misinformed, or, you were talking maybe about glass between the industry or the romance of the industry and, the reality. And so it's not a simple exercise, I'll say it frankly, because you're not relying on, very hard evidence. It's not easy to teach. You're going outside of your comfort zone as well. If we had a solution to 169 million of children in child labor, I think we would apply it. But the reverse side of the coin is that it's really an activity where you can engage with your students. The probability that they be decision makers in the future is much more important than me. I'm already a failed alumni of my school. 10 years after graduating, I'm not in a decision-making position. So what I mean is they will be the people taking the decisions. I have to help them get the confidence to take those decisions. And multi-stakeholder initiatives where they have to understand what the perspective of business is, but what the perspective of the community is, what the perspective of government is really very interesting. So I don't use cobalt, I use fish because we have big issues in the fishing industry and we eat quite a lot of fish in France. So that's something simple. And they don't eat fish for some time after my class because they realize the human rights abuses and go look up human rights abuses in the fishing industry. You'll be surprised.
Thanks, Charles. He's too humble too, because I think students voted him that he's the favorite teacher. So you're doing a great job at HEC Paris. But I want to come back to you briefly, Shai, because you were trained at Erasmus University. Did any of these issues ever sort of come across during your education?
Well, I just a correction. I went to the VUB in Belgium to the Vrije University of Antwerp, but of Brussels. But I do want to attest to your students, and maybe that will answer your question as well. When it was time to create our teams, typically you would look for the more experienced and usually when you build a diamond company, you would ask diamond people to, because if eventually, so we had one simple rule is no diamond relation whatsoever.
Oh wow!
And the second rule is that we have to have people that care, and so we end up with an average age of 24. So to speak to your let's say future work of your students, I am surrounded. I would say not 24/7, but many hours of the day with kids that are, it's their first job, either straight from masters or straight from university, from data scientist to supply chain management. And everything that I thought the 24-year-old is completely different. And we are at least 30 of us, but 8 in my immediate team, which comes every day and just think, how do I want to feel great about my job? And so we have a 9 to 5, but everybody's there at 7:30, and we have a 9 to 5, and everybody stays until 7, because it's such a creation feel. So in response to you, I think that when there is an achievable goal, which is which you get positive reinforcement on, I think that this is where you get individuals to be so on board that they drive the change themselves. And we were lucky enough to have those positive reinforcement. And now after 2.5 years, they are the one. I just came from 2 weeks in Botswana, and they were the one running the company. So it's I think the future is bright.
That's an almost perfect last statement. Let me just say one more thing. clearly we need to cater as instructors for this interest of the next generation that wants to work on, they want to be part of the solution, not part of the problem. So how can we as business schools cater to this interest? Here at GBSN, we have an impact community on business human rights where we also work together on developing teaching tools that can then be readily applied into the network's curricula and teaching. So I invite you to join us. We have an annual meeting on December 2, in person in Geneva or online. It would be great if you would become engaged in our impact community. With that, I think I don't have a watch, but I think it was like a Swiss train on time. So with this, I thank you, and I thank both of you very much.
You want to take a question, or? Yeah, I think
Since we have another minute, we could take a question unless Nicole wants.
You take a couple questions.
Awesome,
Okay.
great. Or comments or reactions to this.
Anyone? Shocking.
Okay.
Okay.
Very good.
First of all, really cool stuff you're working on. How many years have you been working on the Diamond Initiative, if I may ask?
Well, I was born into diamonds as my father was first generation, so I've been engulfed in that in many ways. Around 2004, we realized that it's all bad, and it took us about 10 years to bring it up, and only in 2019 we were able to align all the stars to make sure that the company comes alive. So it was a very long journey full of suffering.
Your talk was pitched to me as blockchain for diamonds. I want to applaud you on not using the word blockchain.
Thank you. Yeah, it's overly used as much as transparency is.
Mhm. Great. That was a question next. Yeah.
Thank you, Dorothy and the team. You did show us a photo of some guys in DRC on a bicycle.
Oh, can't go back anymore. Sorry. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, I can
Now-
give some context to that picture. I
Yeah.
took it after all. Yeah.
There's a lot of diamond, yes, in DRC Congo.
Yeah.
But there have been a lot of human rights concerns about that. So as a business, as a business school or a business person, how are you then helping these guys to ensure that they no longer use those kind of bicycles, but at least you uplift their life?
Okay, great question, which I could talk for hours about. So this picture is from a pilot site called Mutoshi, where a multinational corporation actually integrates artisanal miners in an industrial mine site, because artisanal mining makes between 20 and 40% of the cobalt production in the DRC. And the DRC accounts for 70%, more than 70% of the cobalt production worldwide. So any company in need of cobalt can't get around the DRC. And artisanally mined cobalt is just a significant portion of that supply chain. And it is in those artisanal mines where human rights risks are the greatest, particularly mine safety and child labor. The photo is from a project site, which I think has tackled the problem in a really interesting way, namely, instead of throwing those artisanal miners off industrial mining concessions, they invited them in with standards. You see that those guys are wearing helmets, uniforms, boots, and they are operating on this mine site with some standards that have been set up. It's called formalization of an entirely informal activity. And I believe this formalization can be scaled and replicated by many companies. And so I travel to these countries not to, again, document human rights violations. This is what Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International and other human rights organizations do. I go because I want to figure out business solutions to these topics, to these issues, business solutions that even individual companies can install, irrespective of how messy the operating context is. And the DRC is particularly weak rule of law, and it will take a long time for the government to address these issues. In the meantime, we cannot wait. I think companies need to start figuring out solutions directly. And this project that I looked at, to me, indicates a solution that can be scaled. But happy to talk more with you about this. Yeah. Maybe a final question. I don't want to cut into other people's time. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you to the team. A very brief question. You talk about stakeholder initiatives or multi-stakeholder initiatives. And I think the two components that I was missing there that I know you had in the background are influence versus interest. And as business schools, of course, and businesses, I think there's a trade-off there, because if you think about that grid, as in who do we keep satisfied, which stakeholders do we monitor closely, and so on and so forth, how do we strike a balance? One, as businesses and in keeping with human rights, or the human rights agenda, where would be the focus? How do we get the trade-off between the interest versus influence? Because if we're talking about child labor, if we're talking about the diamonds, somebody's holding more influence and somebody has got the interest. So the interested people or stakeholders are also likely to be, less influential. So how do we navigate those two elements?
I can very soon we realized that we created the perfect alignment between the community and the client. And in the process, we created this this journey that didn't exist before. And then we came on to the retailers and to the brands, and we showed them this product that we created, which is totally different than the one before. And they were not interested in it. Because they say, you know what, if it's not broken, with all due respect, we're not going to buy something else than the one that, because, all our purchasing power is going to be diminished and we don't want to pay more, and maybe the client will not understand it, and we cannot buy 100% from you. So very soon we realized that in order to create change or this influence for people to come on board our mission, we had to use, as Dorothy said, both the carrot and the stick. So for the year of 2023, we're going to create a very negative campaign and a very positive campaign in order to bring this awareness, because the only way it can change is if it comes from the people that buy it. And I think that it's the same with Cobalt, when they demand of what their computers would be like. We have a mutual friend in Microsoft, which is very much interested in this initiative. And whether it's something that you buy as diamond, if it's not coming from the consumer, nothing will change. And I think that it's sort of our responsibility, at least as businesses, both to be able to sustain and to create the change that we believe in, is to create very much awareness. And sometimes awareness can be done in a negative and in a positive campaign. So I think we're going to have to use both in order to be effective. I don't know if it answered the question or if it was just.
If I can just add one idea to this, because I know maybe we disagree a bit with Shai about the role of government intervention with regards to multi-stakeholder initiatives. I mean, governments are sometimes part of multi-stakeholder initiatives.
Absolutely.
But I've seen, for example, in my country, in France, we have a number of businesses operating in the cocoa sector. I mean, especially at the high end of the sector. And we see multi-stakeholder initiatives blooming because, I mean, even my students, when I ask them, what's the solution? Oh, we should do a multi-stakeholder initiative. So it's kind of the easy solution. And recently, I think it was last year for the World Cocoa Day or something, the state stepped up and said, nobody understands anything anymore here. So we need to take all of these initiatives and we need to regroup them and simplify. Now, this, I think, I don't want to say that specific intervention was positive, time will tell, but sometimes regulators, governments, regional authorities need to step up. Otherwise, we see, everyone wants to have his own label. We have a lot of personal branding. It works for individuals. It works for companies as well. So I do think there's a whole field of research. What you've been doing, Doro, should be completely, people should walk in the footsteps and do more research on multi-stakeholder initiatives. This is what will help us understand what's working and what's not.
Yes. Perfect way to close. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so before we go to the next session, we're just going to view a short video by one of our sponsors, MIT Sloan. And now a special message. Love it. Very energetic music. Okay, so I am going to introduce the next speakers for our next session, the resilience of social logistics systems. We've got Steve Sonka, Professor Steve Sonka, fellow at the Ed Snyder Center for Enterprise and Markets at the Robert H. Smith School of Business at the University of Maryland. He leads a multi-institutional team focused on the implementation of entrepreneurial and managerial practice to reduce food loss and waste in agricultural supply chains serving smallholder farmers in developing countries. And he is joined by Dr. Anna Timu, who is a lecturer, technical advisor at Sokoine University of Agriculture. Please. Welcome. Thank you.